What's going on? Alex here, and today I'm answering your tax questions from YouTube. Now, in particular, this question comes from Louis M. or Luis. I'm not sure quite how to pronounce it. Hopefully that's correct. One of those at least. So let's take a look at the question here. It says, "Hey Alex, I'm studying for the CPA right now. 2 down, 2 to go. Congratulations. It's a beautiful thing to be half done with that beast. How many years of experience in tax do you recommend before one starts their own practice? Is having your own firm more lucrative than working for someone else?" I think these are great questions, and I'm more than happy to answer them for you from my perspective. So, in terms of years of experience in tax, I think it's more to do with the extent of your experience and the quality of the experience, right? Because essentially you want to be comfortable in all the different aspects of what it takes to actually prepare tax returns. It's not just punching numbers into a tax return. There's client communication, there's planning, there's follow-up, there's review, and a lot of different things that I'll touch on in a bit more detail, but it really has more to do with how well-rounded you are as a tax preparer and how good you are on the technical side, but also the communication side, the people side, because it is a fine balance. People think CPAs just kind of sit on their own and crunch numbers all day, but really it has a lot to do with how you communicate and how you explain different concepts to clients. That's going to really affect how they perceive your service to be, whether they're going to be happy with it or they're going to think that you always talk above them and you're not really connecting on any sort of personal basis. So let's talk about the few phases of tax preparation that really go into providing that high level of client service. And you really have to ask yourself, do you have experience in all these areas? And if not, can you possibly achieve that experience while working for somebody else? Because it's much easier to learn on somebody else's dime than having to figure it out for yourself in the heat of battle, so to speak, right? First, there's client onboarding. And what that has to do with is basically making a new client feel comfortable, that you're eager to help them, and that you also make sure that you get a comprehensive perspective of their overall situation. It's also going to help you weed out clients that are trying to shop CPAs to find somebody who's going to take a bunch of dubious, questionable deductions on their behalf. And just like people doctor shop, because when somebody wants pills, they'll go to 10 different doctors and complain of back pain, and hopefully at least 1 or 2 of those will prescribe them pills. People do the same thing with CPAs, and client onboarding has a lot to do with weeding out people that may present a higher risk to the firm than others. So very important aspect in terms of having those people skills necessary to onboard clients correctly. You want them to feel welcome, but at the same time, you also want to identify possible risks right at the front end of the relationship that may exist, okay? So if you don't have experience in client onboarding, certainly try to get that under your belt before you go off on your own. Really important. Aside from that is data gathering, all right? So once the client is onboarded, they sign the engagement letter, they're ready to move forward, you need to obtain all the necessary information for tax preparation. Now, unfortunately, it is voluminous, the number of questions we need to ask our clients. So we want to try to make sure that we obtain information from them in the most efficient way possible. And it's extremely important to not agitate your clients by asking them questions here, asking them the same questions here, plus another few, asking them another few questions here, because that gets annoying very quickly. Clients want to offload the responsibility of tax preparation. They don't want to hold our hand multiple times along the way, and they really don't want to answer the same question multiple times. So you want to make sure that in the data gathering process, you're as efficient as possible, because you want to make this process painless and even, dare I say, enjoyable for clients. Because if they are digging your personality, they're digging the process, and they don't feel like they're being burdened by taxes, then that's going to create value that is going to drive clients to come back year over year. All right, that's going to help you develop your brand. So very important that you're comfortable in that data gathering process, and you also make the client feel comfortable as well. So if you're not really participating in that aspect of things, make sure you get some experience in that area as well. That's going to help you overall when you go off on your own. Next, once we've gathered the data, next step is tax preparation. And this is where some of the technical skills come into play, because you have to not only be familiar with the tax software that you're using, but you also need to understand where the numbers should end up when all is said and done, all right? So just keying in numbers into boxes in the tax software is not good enough, especially when you go off on your own, because you are going to be responsible for everything on that return. And I've seen plenty of firms that key in the information and just assume that the tax return is going to be perfect when it's spit out of the software. Not necessarily the case. And I could tell you, as someone who reviews a lot of tax returns, there are so many things on there that end up because the preparer did not take the time to actually go through the numbers on the return and make sure every checkbox is applicable. There's so much information that's encompassed in a tax return. It's crazy. And you want to make sure that you are knowledgeable in not only where to input the data, but also what the outcome should be. That's where the value comes in of being a tax preparer, more so than just some number cruncher that types in W-2s. Tax preparation, really important. The other consideration is the tax software that your firm uses. Now, if you work for a firm that does taxes for multi-billion-dollar companies and you want to go off on your own and prepare 1040s for individuals, there may be a huge disconnect between the software that your firm uses and the software you're going to be able to and want to use. Now, if there is alignment there that if your firm does 1040s and you want to do 1040s, then very well, you may want to stick with the software that they have just because you're familiar with it, you have knowledge in how to operate it, and the little quirks and features that go along with every particular software. Now, if you have to learn new software, then make sure you get that under your belt before you go off on your own, because you don't want to be starting your business, getting new clients, and then learning software at the same time. So definitely put some thought into that aspect in terms of which software you're going to be using for tax preparation, and try to get experience in that while you're an employee before you start your business. Crucial. Once you review your tax returns, this is something that's skipped, unfortunately, by many tax preparers, but it's extremely important as well, and that's the review process, all right? And reviewing your own work is not exciting. It's boring. It's soul-crushing, mind-numbing, but I can tell you that every tie-out I do, and a tie-out is when you have the prepared tax return and you review every checkbox, every name, every number, and you tie it back to the supporting documentation, being W-2s, 1099s, and so forth. That process, 9 times out of 10, identifies issues that need to be addressed on the return. So if you just input all the information, there may be things from prior tax years that carry over that may not be applicable, that may need to be adjusted. So you can't just assume that if you keyed the information from the W-2, let's say, in all the right boxes, that everything's going to turn out correct, because there's usually some twists and turns with taxes that are applicable, and you will identify them in the review process. So if you just prepare returns and you don't review returns in your current position with your employer, ask to get that experience. Say, hey, I did the tax prep. I'm ready to expand my scope of work, and I would love to get to reviewing some returns. And once you have that experience under your belt, that's another level of value that you can provide, because you could just look at a return and something could stand out to you as being odd, and that's where you can find a lot of mistakes. So certainly review process, crucial as well, and you want to make sure that you get well-rounded experience in that area. Once you've prepared the return and reviewed the return, what's the next step? Wrap up calls, and also tax planning. So wrap-up calls is when the return's all done, you call the client and say, hey, we got everything prepared for you. You're looking at a refund of this at the federal level, of that at the state level. And going forward, here are some opportunities you may be able to take advantage of. For example, if they can contribute to an IRA account, you can discuss the pros and cons of making an IRA contribution and whether it's going to be deductible or not, and kind of add additional value on top of the tax preparation, because a lot of firms will just stop at the tax prep, call it a day, right? You want to go above and beyond that, because you're going to have competition out there once you go off on your own. So you definitely want to think from a planning perspective and say to your clients, hey, just based on your situation, have you ever considered XYZ? And clients will say, oh, no, I never really thought of that. My prior preparer never mentioned that. Boom. Now you're creating value. You're getting closer to the client. You're increasing retention. And that overall is going to help you down the line to make sure that that client is a sticky client, that they don't go to another firm that just charges $5 less per tax return, all right? So those wrap-up calls really help clients to feel like they are cared for, that the return was done with them in mind. They know all of the amounts due, or all of the refund amounts, whether it's going to be electronically withdrawn, whether they're going to need to write a check and send a voucher. And just guiding clients through this process is crucial, because if they're bombarded with a bunch of signature pages and vouchers and they don't know what to do and how to pay and how the whole process works, that creates stress for your clients. And your job is to alleviate as much stress for your clients as possible. So wrap-up calls and tax planning, crucial value add. If you don't have experience in that area, get experience in it. It's going to help you and pay for itself tenfold. That I can promise you. Finally, documentation. Now, depending on how your firm is structured, where you're working, you may have exposure to documentation, you may not, but you want to make sure you document, because when you're off on your own, if it's not documented, it never happened. And you'd be amazed how many times clients can get a letter in the mail and the first instinct is to blame their tax preparer for missing something. And this is where documentation can be your saving grace, in that you could say, hey, on multiple occasions, we informed you that this is the deadline. We sent you an email on this date, and this date. We had a phone call on this date and this date. Here's what we discussed. That is a CYA tactic, or cover your fill in the blank tactic, that is going to be crucial when you're off on your own, because if a client receives a penalty notice, their first instinct is to blame the preparer. And if you have the documentation in your favor, you'll have the client say, hey, yeah, sorry, it wasn't you, I screwed up. And then you go from there. It's a whole different perspective on how everything plays out if you have the documentation in place. So make sure your documentation is on point. That really wraps up the different areas of taxes that you want to be well versed in. And that's why I say, instead of years of experience, it's more the extent and the quality of the experience. It could take you 2 years to get there. It could take you 5 years to get there. But overall, if you're looking at preparing 1040 returns for individual clients, how comfortable are you with that entire process for 1040s? Now, if you're preparing 1065s or partnership returns, similarly, you want to be extremely knowledgeable and comfortable with a bunch of different variations of situations that you can run into. So if your goal is to prepare 1040s and 1065s on your own, but you currently prepare 1040s only, then get that experience in the 1065s while you're still working for another firm, because not only are you going to get experience when somebody else is there to review it and show you your mistakes, you're also going to be able to have that much more confidence when you're out on your own in terms of talking to prospects and saying, hey, your situation with the partnership, I've dealt with that before, and here's how we can approach it. Here's how we can fix it, possibly get some penalties abated. You look like a hero, all right? So to answer your first question, I don't know if it's a number of years. It's just getting to the point where you're comfortable, you're well-versed, and more importantly than anything, if you don't know the answer, know where to find the answer. Because I could tell you, I don't have all the answers. Far from it. But I know where to find them. And if I dig hard enough, I dig deep enough, I will find some substantive information that I can rely on to make decisions for what I'm going to do from a tax perspective, whether we deduct, capitalize, this, that, and the other. And I'm able to explain these situations to the clients in a way that they can understand. So those are crucial points that you want to keep in mind on that front. Okay, so if you don't know the answer, make sure you know how to find it. All right, and to go to your second question, you asked if owning your own firm is more lucrative than working for someone else. And that really depends, because there are some huge differences between being an employee and being self-employed. As someone with 2 CPA exams down, you already know a lot of this, I'm sure. But just briefly summarizing some of the differences, as an employee, the marketing is taken care of for you. All right? So most often, you're not out there hunting for clients. It's a much different perspective when you're out on your own, because now you have to partake in the marketing. Now, for example, this is me doing marketing right now. It's 1:21 a.m. on a Thursday. Well, it's Friday already, and I'm here making YouTube videos answering questions. But you know what? It pays dividends, and I'm more than happy to do it. But it was much easier for me to stay home tonight, eat some snacks, watch some YouTube videos, and go to bed. But here I am hustling, and that's what you're going to also need to do if you want to grow your practice. So the marketing is going to be one aspect that's definitely going to be different going from an employee perspective to being on your own. Aside from that, healthcare costs, all right? We got to mention this. As an employee, they're going to be a lot less generally than what they're going to be on the self-employed side. So once healthcare costs are your own responsibility and you don't have an employer, be ready to pay a lot more, and that's going to factor into how lucrative it is or isn't for you in terms of going off on your own. Next, we've got benefits to talk about. When you're an employee, you get a whole bunch of benefits, time off, this, that. You get kind of spoiled in terms of how many freebies you get from your employer. Well, I mean, you're still working for them, but anyway, at least feels like it's free. When you're self-employed, there are no benefits aside from the ones you create for yourself. That's a drastic change for a lot of people because they're used to being comforted with, time off, vacation, this, that. When you're on your own, none of that exists, okay? So also factor that into how lucrative being self-employed is or isn't for you. Next, when you're an employee, you have a fixed salary or you get hourly compensation. It's pretty straightforward. Not too much variation there. You know what you're going to get at the end of the week, at the end of the month, and you're able to budget accordingly. When you're on your own, you eat what you kill, all right? So you could have some good months, some bad months, depending on how good your marketing is, depending on how your processes are set up. You may be much better off as a self-employed individual. You could make double what you're making as an employee. You can make triple, all right? There's really no ceiling. But to get there, it's going to be a lot harder. There's going to be a lot more headaches involved, and you have to be ready to really devote yourself to your business because it's like having a baby. It's really something that needs your constant attention. You're going to have competition, and it's dog-eat-dog out there. And with that, it's a whole different vibe than just getting that weekly paycheck or that monthly paycheck. That's definitely something that's going to be a change, and it's really all up to you as to how lucrative your firm turns out to be as opposed to being an employee, all right? And the sky's the limit, but the risks are higher, the challenges are higher, and if you think you're going to go from 9 to 5 as an employee to 9 to 5 as a self-employed individual, you're crazy because there's going to be a lot more work that you're going to need to put in by yourself to make things happen. So keep that in mind. One benefit, though, that I have is from being self-employed is that I don't need to follow anybody's rules. I make the rules. I make the processes. I choose who I work with. There's a lot more freedom, but that freedom comes at a cost in that there's a lot more responsibility as well, a lot more downside risk. As an employee, you just follow somebody else's rules, okay? So it's a little bit easier from that respect. You don't need to set up all this architecture. You don't need to set up all these systems and processes and stay up at night reading reviews of this service over that service. And for some people, that structure is a bit easier to deal with in terms of their personality. For me, I like that lone wolf approach and that I can make my own rules, choose who I work with, and the fruits of my labor are directly attributable to me instead of going up to the owners of a firm that I happen to work for. So, Louis or Luis, hopefully this helps shed some light on these questions and the possible benefits or downsides of being on your own versus working as an employee. So if you want to start your own tax practice, these are some things definitely that you want to consider because the decisions you make up front are going to have a huge impact on how things turn out for you overall. So thanks again for your YouTube question. I love reading all of the comments that you guys write. So if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a question for me because I'm going to start answering some of these questions in videos and getting pretty in-depth on some of them. So that's going to be something to look out for. And again, if you haven't hit that bell icon, hit it so you're notified of future videos. Share this video if you found it useful. And as always, hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for watching.